Thank you, everyone. Good afternoon. Welcome to Twitter. So I must apologize for not having been here this morning. I was teaching a class, so I'm sure that all the talks were super duper interesting, and I'm looking forward to meet and connect with you. So let me briefly ask you this. So this is going to be a warm-up, right? So it's not going to be a lecture. You are going to work for it, right? So as a warm-up, think of these two pieces of feedback and look into how much value you did provide to your student with, right? So I'll read the first one briefly and the second one, and then we'll talk about that. Oh yeah, the sound is much better now. Thank you. Okay, you guys are good? Okay, think about it, right? From, value add, right? Not actions on your part so much. Okay, so let me briefly introduce myself. So I'm first an engineer. I was fortunate to be able to work on projects that were both hardware and software based. I work in mostly semiconductor companies. EMD has basically spent 10 years. And in fact, I worked on big data problem before they were big data, kind of known. Right. So especially with a transistor that counted in the billions. Then I went back to school and I decided that teaching was very nice, so I added that to my curriculum. There's a gym downstairs. I'll get to that. So today I'm a Twitter. I'm very happy about that, teaching on a wide range of domain, specifically as part of Twitter University. And I'm also fortunate to give lectures from time to time to the Wharton School on Berkeley. Okay, so going back to feedback. What do you think of the first one? Only a half an hour, guys, so we need to speed up. So what do you think of the first one? Yeah, that's exactly what I was fearing, right? You just got lunch, digestion is kicking in, right? So if this was a test to check if you were still with me. Okay, there's absolutely nothing good about the first one. Don't try to find something good. If I have that, I will not stay very long. Where am I? All right. What about the second one? That one is a little bit more interesting. Better, okay. I used to think that when I started teaching, right? And something that I didn't, explain that much is that, I have no formal training in teaching. So it is something that I was picked up. And when I used to get that feedback, I was like, yes! Okay, the problem is that they probably haven't learned that much if it was so easy to understand in the first place. You should just have stayed in bed. And that would have been exactly the same effect, right? So, oh, clicker doesn't work anymore now. Okay, so bad on bad. Check, check. Yeah, next one. Next slide. Okay. Oh, perfect. Okay, so now, next slides. So this morning, I told you that I was teaching a class, right? So we have new hires, every 2 weeks. And in this class, name Building and Deploying Services at Twitter. This is what I talk about, right? So I want to go from one extreme where you don't teach anything because it's so easy to understand to something a little bit more meaty, right? So I talk about distributed resource manager, right? Beaker, the job scheduler, macroservice architecture, PANTS, application logic services, source, deployment stack, you name it. Pick whatever you want. Okay, imagine this is the feedback I got. A lot of valuable content, but 2 hours was insufficient to cover it all. Yeah, in fact, I only have 2 hours, right? You would think that, I need 8 for that, right? I just did 2, right? So I could have done, 4 times the speed to do 8 hours in 2. How do you like this? Yeah, in terms of value added, it's not that great either, right? So that kind of sucks. No, yeah, really. If you don't provide value, don't bother. So here, in a sense, right, if you do this kind of classes, then things are just become stuff, right? Nobody will remember, right? And in a sense, we are still failing a student, right? So we are at Twitter, so I need to show tweets, right? So, but there's tons of us. So how do we go about teaching everything that we need to learn, right? It's really, about teaching and learning at the same time. Teaching for you, learning from them. So the first thing, and I love that we have a gym downstairs, is that learning is hard. We tend to think that, so we tend to be obsessed in designing classes that are easy to digest, right? That's not reality, right? It's difficult to learn things, right? No pain, no gain, right? From Jane Fonda in the 80s, right? And going back, to the gym downstairs, it was not a coincidence that you put you here, right? That was for my talk. But if you guys, go to the gym and you have a great time, which is usually what I do, right? You don't stress your muscles. You are not going to build a six-pack, right? It's the same with learning, right? If you just have a great time, it's not going to work, right? So effort is a very important, aspect. So I didn't have the opportunity to learn about Jane Fonda in the 80s, but I did have my own shows on Sundays with Veronique and Davina. I always, remember those days, right? Huge popularity in France. Check that, exactly the same thing as Jane Fonda. So when I think about learning, and things are hard, I think about that. And in fact, I watched a video from that yesterday. We are smiling, right? We are basically, feeling the burn, but we are happy about it. So how do we do that on teaching our own students? Right? So growth mindset. You know about growth mindset. Everybody know about growth mindset. But have you taught your student about growth mindset in the first place? Did you tell them what it was? If you did, that's great. They probably forgot. So you need to keep that message, up on the one, right? So part of the growth mindset, right, is really about embracing challenges, learn from criticisms, and so on. But the most important part is that you need to see effort as a path to mastery, right? Something very similar is the 10,000 hours, to master something, right? We're not there yet, in the Matrix time where you can just basically block something in the back of your head and you get to know, Kung Fu and stuff like that. Not yet, right? So that's basically, point number one. The second thing, right, that is important, to help. So when I basically said that learning is painful, it doesn't mean that you need to be painful for the sake of being painful in the first place, right? So you want to embrace challenges, but you want to do it in a very positive way. So how do you help people to learn what is important? And something that I think works very well is starting with the how, why versus the how, right? So going back to the class this morning, right, out of that list of stuff, there's a lot of interesting things that happen in the history of Twitter, right? Everybody kind of like that. I gave them a story for almost 2 hours, right? So we've done, a butterfly, type, of approach, but, that resonated with them, right? At some point, they will have to go back to the material, right? But in a sense, that's basically what I told them this morning, they're going to see something and they're going to hear that weird French voice in the back and say, oh, yeah, that thing was super duper interesting. Pay attention to this. The rest, not so much, right? That was not so interesting. But you provide context, right? And when you provide basically a story, you also invite people to start conversing with you, right? I probably talk slightly over 50% of the time in the class, right? It's a good balance, right? I got a lot of people. I also got asking questions. People were also changing, ideas on how things happen in previous companies. That provides a very rich environment and make classes very unique, right? So don't lecture, right? I think, conversation is great. So if we were, to be a little bit formal about, educations, we'll call that retrieval learning, right? You're trying to pull information out of people's head, right? Provide context. Okay, so that's already number 2. I'm going too fast. So benefits that I think are important. For you, the instructor, you need to prioritize what's important. Right? You can't talk about 50 different items in 2 hours, right? If everything is important, nothing is important, right? So less is more. I always love that, to say that, right? Try to say that to my wife, but she doesn't believe me, right? Especially for things I need to do over the weekend. But for your student, you help them to learn broadly, right? It doesn't make sense to be very deep into some kind of details, right? It's really about what different things are in a broad sense, and starting connecting the pieces together. Time will help you to connect things, right? Okay, so now let's suppose that I was just reading the feedback for the class this morning, and I get this. Mission accomplished or not? I get yes in the back. Yes? Yeah, I mean, better. I mean, doesn't mean that it is nothing actionable, basically for me to say, right? So it doesn't mean that it's perfect, but I would say it doesn't suck too much, at least that, right? I'm hopeful that I did provide value to my student. Okay, so last thing, and I don't want to spend too much time on that, because I think they will be deserving of a topic by itself. But pacing is something that we do, as well as interleaving. Pacing is basically saying that you're not going to teach one domain in just a block of times and be done with it, right? I mean, did you guys learn additions or multiplications in one day? No, things were spread out, right? The same thing happens here, right? When I talk to them about Swift services, if I wanted to cover it all in 2 hours, believe me, they want nothing to do with it for the rest of their life, right? So interleaving is something similar, but instead of it's part of basically spreading things up, but you are starting to mix it with something else. So if we're talking about REST services, for example, you want to talk about something else than just REST services. You want to start talking about something else, so that you provide opportunities to start linking things together. All right? So let's do a case study. So Twitter Futures, right? So Twitter Futures is a construct that is extremely fundamental for engineers to be able to master Twitter, right? This is how they are going to be able to develop macroservices that are going to scale, right? So if you don't know, right, the record for Twitter is 2 million tweets within a second. Right. Fantastic, right? So Twitter Futures is one of the technologies that enable this. Right. So how do I do this? Well, so first, this is exactly what the class from this morning was, building and deploying microservices. I motivate what Twitter Futures are. Right. So I use that example of 2 million tweets, tends to resonate, with people. When we play about the code a bit, which is about 10 minutes, they at least see that in actions a bit. They don't really understand how the pieces, are, put together, but from a user standpoint, they kind of see some benefit of that. Okay, that's one class. Then, at some point, they are going to go to a next class, especially, this one, when we are actually going to build a service. So it's a wonderful class. I definitely love it. Maybe them not so much when they see me too often. But we go over the core construct of services on Twitter Futures, then as a bigger role into this class. And especially show them, for example, how to, what we call compose futures. So within a Twitter stack, you're going to make a request to a service. That service is also going to make requests to other services. So what is the logic, how does it work, for the service in the middle, right? It's going to have something asynchronous, and it's going to itself make asynchronous requests, right? So on that, we probably spend a good 40 minutes to go over the construct. It starts to make more sense. Are they expert? Probably not. This is where the learning on the job makes sense. After the class, we have a chance to either review code or start to run their own services. Right? And then they're going to have the expertise of the guy and gal who are basically just sitting next to them. They're going to learn more stuff regarding that subject. At some point, in the meantime, right, they're going to take over classes, and we are going to talk about concepts that are related, right, but we are not going to make a physical link between this. Right? So for example, Twitter Futures, an example of what we call nomads. Right? It's kind of a mathematical construct, but we don't talk too much about that. But planting a seed that eventually is going to flourish into a full flower at some point. So we're going to keep practice on the job, and at some point we're going to take a class that is just going to be dedicated for Twitter Futures. So about 2 hours, we go into more details, and we are especially going into the pitfalls, things that you think you could be doing, but things that you should not be doing, in fact, if you want to do that 2 million peak tweets per second. Right? And then eventually, right, so we're going to take other classes, and we're going to introduce some more concepts as we go. Right? So we go here you run 4 circles, and then you rinse and repeat for the next concept, and you keep going. This is how we want to do it here within Twitter. And I would argue that this looks very slow, right? But for me, right, and I see basic results, this is really accelerated running, right? Yes, you have a lot of small turtles, but you have a lot of them, right? So in a sense, you speed things up. Nothing that I told you here is something that I invented. I wish I could have made these books be very famous and be very rich. I stole it from other people, right? So I'll go over that, but I want to go over the thicker ways. Learning is hard, right? You know it. Make sure that you still not know about this. It's easy to forget, right? I love when I go to the gym, because I see people, around me, crying, right? Or kind of not really crying, but, you can see it's not easy. So when I see that and I'm in pain, I kind of like, oh yeah, there's nothing special about it, right? But, sometimes you forget about that, right? So storytelling, I love to tell stories. People love to hear stories, right? It's not because it's technical that it needs to be boring. I think it has to be the entire opposite. Right? I'm sure there's something super interesting, right, that you can use to build your stories, and explicitly, go with the why versus the what and the how. Nobody cares about the what and the how too much, not in the beginning, right? You need to build context. And finally, use pacing and interleavings to kind of, go more into the details. Don't explain everything at once, right? You need to do, small chunks, little by little, right? Spread it out, right, and mix it up. Okay, so things that I love, so I read a lot of that stuff, right? I think, it's super duper interesting. Mindset from Carol Dweck is a great one, to go with. Power Styling, is fantastic. And, things regarding pacing and interleaving is very well described in Powerful Teaching. So I really encourage you to try different things, right? As a heart, I see myself as a data scientist. Try experiment, right? If something works, then try something different, right? If it works better, great. If it doesn't work so well, try something else, right? Questions?
Thank you.